22-year-old hiking influencer vanished on the Appalachian Trail. 7 months later, hunters found her body suspended from a tree, wrapped in vines and her own clothing. But her phone revealed she'd been alive just days before discovery. The question is, who was keeping her? The Appalachian Trail stretches over 2,000 miles of rugged wilderness, and every year dozens of hikers vanish without a trace. Most are found within days, victims of accidents or poor planning. But some disappearances are different. Some leave behind questions that haunt investigators for years. This is the story of Sierra Blackwood, a 22-year-old social media influencer whose vanishing became one of the most disturbing cases in trail history. What happened to Sierra in those remote mountains reveals a terrifying truth about the predators that lurk in our wilderness areas, and the evil that some people are capable of when they think no one is watching. Sierra's story began like so many others, with dreams of internet fame and the dangerous belief that nothing bad could happen to someone young and confident. She was wrong. Dead wrong. Sierra Blackwood had been hiking and posting content online for 3 years before she decided to attempt a solo through hike of the Appalachian Trail. With over 180,000 followers on various platforms, she made her living selling outdoor gear and promoting hiking destinations to young adventurers who looked up to her fearless attitude. Sierra was known for taking risks that more experienced hikers warned against, but her audience loved the excitement and she loved the attention. She was planning to document every mile of her journey, streaming live footage and posting daily updates that would hopefully push her follower count over 200,000. The sponsorship deals that would come with that milestone could set her up financially for years. Sierra spent months preparing for the hike, but her preparation focused more on camera equipment and social media strategy than actual wilderness survival skills. She purchased the most expensive gear available, not because she understood what made it better, but because the price tags would impress her followers. She practiced setting up her tent in her backyard and took a few weekend camping trips to local state parks, but she had never spent more than 2 nights alone in true wilderness. Her friends and family expressed concerns about her doing such a challenging hike alone, but Sierra dismissed their worries as jealousy and small-minded thinking. She was young, strong, and had technology to keep her connected to the outside world. What could go wrong? The answer to that question would emerge 7 months later in the most horrifying way possible. Sierra began her northbound through hike on March 15th at Springer Mountain in Georgia. Her first week of posts showed her struggle to adapt to the physical demands of long-distance hiking, but she maintained her confident online persona even as her feet developed painful blisters and her pack weight slowed her progress. She met other hikers along the way, and several would later tell investigators that Sierra seemed more focused on getting the perfect shot for social media than actually enjoying the hiking experience. She would often ask other hikers to film her walking past scenic viewpoints or pretend to struggle with difficult terrain for dramatic effect. While most hikers found her behavior annoying, she was generally well-liked by her online audience who appreciated her honesty about the challenges of trail life. What none of them knew was that someone else was watching Sierra's posts with very different intentions. Blake Morrison had been following Sierra's content for over a year before she started her through hike. A 34-year-old unemployed military veteran, Blake had become obsessed with Sierra's online presence after stumbling across her hiking videos during his own mental health struggles. He lived in a cabin in rural Virginia, about 50 miles from the Appalachian Trail, and spent most of his time alone in the woods. Blake had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger before being discharged for behavioral issues related to untreated PTSD. He struggled to maintain jobs or relationships, and his family had largely cut contact with him after several violent outbursts. The isolation and mental health issues had warped Blake's thinking over the years, and he developed an unhealthy fixation on young women who posted outdoor content online. He told himself he was just a fan, but his behavior suggested something much darker. Blake had created dozens of fake social media accounts to follow and interact with Sierra's content. He saved every photo she posted and spent hours analyzing her videos for clues about her location and travel plans. When Sierra announced her through-hike plans, Blake began formulating his own plan to intercept her somewhere along the trail. He studied maps of the Appalachian Trail corridor and identified remote sections where he could approach her without witnesses. Blake was an experienced outdoorsman and hunter who knew how to move through the forest without being detected. His military training had taught him surveillance and tracking techniques that he was now planning to use for evil purposes. If you're disgusted by predators like Blake who target innocent people, hit subscribe because only people who support stalkers and criminals won't. As Sierra hiked north through Georgia and into North Carolina, she had no idea that Blake was monitoring her progress and preparing to make his move. Her daily posts provided him with detailed information about her location, hiking pace, and planned stops. Blake purchased camping gear and began taking extended trips into the mountains, ostensibly for hunting and fishing, but actually to scout locations and practice his approach. He was methodical and patient, willing to wait for the perfect opportunity when Sierra would be most vulnerable and isolated. Sierra's social media posts during her first month on the trail painted a picture of someone living their best life, but fellow hikers who encountered her told a different story. Trail journals and online forums from that time period reveal that Sierra was struggling more than she let on. Her gear was too heavy, her pace was inconsistent, and she frequently asked other hikers for help with basic tasks like filtering water and setting up her shelter. More concerning was her habit of hiking alone into remote areas to film content, often leaving the main trail for hours at a time to reach photogenic locations. Experienced thru-hikers warned her about the dangers of solo detours, especially for someone with her limited wilderness experience, but Sierra brushed off their concerns as negativity that didn't fit her brand. She was determined to create content that would set her apart from other hiking influencers, and that meant taking risks that more cautious hikers avoided. What Sierra didn't realize was that Blake Morrison had been using her posted locations to track her movement up the trail. By late April, Blake had positioned himself in the Shenandoah National Park area of Virginia, where he knew Sierra would be passing through based on her projected timeline and recent posts. He had established a semi-permanent camp about 3 miles off the main trail, hidden in dense forest where other hikers never ventured. From this base, Blake could monitor the trail corridor and wait for his opportunity. He had studied Sierra's content obsessively and knew her patterns. She typically made camp before sunset, preferred areas near water sources for better photos, and often hiked short side trails to scenic overlooks in the morning before other hikers were active. Blake's military training had taught him patience and observation skills that made him a perfect predator. He could remain hidden and motionless for hours, watching the trail through binoculars and timing the movements of hikers. He knew that Sierra would eventually make a mistake that would give him the chance he was waiting for. His plan was simple but effective. He would approach Sierra when she was alone and isolated, claiming to be a fellow hiker who needed help or wanted to share information about trail conditions ahead. Once he gained her trust, he would lead her away from the main trail to a location where no one would hear her scream. Blake had identified several such locations during his weeks of preparation, and he had supplies cached in each area to support an extended stay in the wilderness. The level of planning and preparation Blake put into his scheme reveals the calculating nature of his evil. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or passion. This was a carefully orchestrated hunt by a predator who knew exactly what he was doing and had no concern for the devastating impact his actions would have on Sierra's family and friends. On May 2nd, Sierra posted what would become her final social media update from the trail. The video showed her setting up camp near a small creek in a remote section of Shenandoah National Park, about 15 miles north of the popular camping areas where most hikers stayed. She had hiked off-trail to reach this location because she wanted to film sunrise footage from a nearby ridge without other people in the background. In the video, Sierra appeared tired but excited about the secluded spot she had found. She mentioned that she hadn't seen another hiker in over 6 hours and joked about having the entire wilderness to herself. The irony of those words would become apparent later. Sierra had no way of knowing that Blake had been watching her for the past 3 days, following at a distance and waiting for exactly this type of opportunity. When Sierra left the main trail to reach her isolated camping spot, Blake saw his chance and began closing the distance between them. That evening, as Sierra prepared her dinner and edited footage for her next post, Blake was less than half a mile away, moving through the forest toward her location. He carried a backpack containing rope, zip ties, duct tape, and other items that revealed his intentions. Blake also carried a knife and had military training in hand-to-hand combat that made him extremely dangerous to a young woman alone in the wilderness. The next morning, Sierra failed to post her usual sunrise video. Her followers initially weren't concerned because she had occasionally skipped posts when dealing with bad weather or technical problems. But when a full day passed without any updates, her most dedicated fans began expressing worry in the comments sections of her previous posts. Sierra's mother tried calling her daughter's satellite communication device but received no response. By the third day without contact, Sierra's family contacted park rangers and requested a welfare check. The search for Sierra Blackwood began on May 5, 3 days after her last known communication. Park rangers and volunteer search teams scoured the area where her final video had been filmed, but they found no trace of her or her equipment. The creekside location where she had camped showed no signs of a struggle or hasty departure. Her tent was gone along with all of her gear and supplies. It was as if Sierra had simply vanished into thin air. The initial investigation focused on the possibility that Sierra had become lost or injured while hiking alone in unfamiliar terrain. Search teams expanded their efforts to cover hundreds of square miles of wilderness, using helicopters, search dogs, and thermal imaging equipment. They found no evidence of Sierra's presence anywhere in the region. As days turned into weeks, investigators began considering other possibilities, including the chance that Sierra's disappearance was voluntary. Some people online speculated that she had staged her own vanishing as an elaborate publicity stunt, pointing to her history of dramatic social media content and her desire for increased followers. Comment: Justice for Sierra. If you're nothing like the monster Blake Morrison, because only predators and stalkers would stay silent about this evil. But Sierra's family and close friends knew that she would never put them through the agony of thinking she was dead or missing. The search for Sierra continued for 6 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers and costing the National Park Service over $200,000 in resources. During this time, investigators discovered disturbing evidence that Sierra's disappearance was not accidental. Analysis of her social media accounts revealed that she had been receiving increasingly aggressive messages from multiple fake accounts in the weeks before she vanished. The messages started as seemingly innocent comments about her hiking posts, but gradually became more personal and threatening. Computer forensics experts traced many of these accounts back to the same IP address, suggesting that one person had been systematically harassing Sierra under different identities. The messages showed an escalating pattern of obsession, with the sender demonstrating detailed knowledge of Sierra's hiking schedule, preferred camping locations, and personal habits that could only have come from careful study of her online content. Some of the final messages contained specific references to locations along the Appalachian Trail that Sierra hadn't yet reached, suggesting that the sender was planning to intercept her somewhere ahead of her current position. Investigators also discovered that Sierra had confided her growing unease to several online friends in private messages during her final week on the trail. She mentioned feeling like she was being watched and had noticed the same person in the background of photos taken days apart in different locations. Sierra had dismissed these feelings as paranoia brought on by solo hiking stress, but her private messages revealed genuine fear that she was careful not to show in her public posts. The realization that Sierra had been systematically stalked by an unknown predator transformed the investigation from a missing person case into a potential kidnapping and murder investigation. FBI agents joined the search effort, bringing additional resources and expertise in tracking online predators. They quickly identified Blake Morrison as their primary suspect after tracing the harassing messages to his rural Virginia property. When investigators arrived at Blake's cabin in late May, they found evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Blake's home contained printed copies of hundreds of Sierra's photos, detailed maps of the Appalachian Trail with her projected route marked in red ink, and camping gear that appeared to have been recently used. Most disturbing was a journal in which Blake had documented his obsession with Sierra, including detailed plans for approaching her on the trail and specific locations where he intended to take her after the initial contact. The journal entries revealed the depth of Blake's mental illness and his complete lack of empathy for Sierra as a human being. He wrote about her as if she were an object that he deserved to possess, and his plans for their encounter included detailed descriptions of violence and imprisonment that investigators couldn't discuss publicly due to their graphic nature. However, when authorities searched Blake's property, they discovered that he had vanished along with Sierra. His truck was gone, and neighbors reported that they hadn't seen him in several weeks. The investigation had identified their predator, but Blake Morrison had disappeared into the same vast wilderness where he had taken Sierra. The search effort expanded to cover hundreds of square miles of remote forest in Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland, areas where Blake was known to hunt and camp. Despite extensive efforts involving multiple law enforcement agencies, no trace of Blake or Sierra was found. As summer turned to fall and fall turned to winter, the active search was scaled back due to harsh weather conditions and diminishing hope of finding Sierra alive. Her family never stopped believing that she would be found, but investigators privately acknowledged that the case had likely become a recovery mission rather than a rescue operation. The story of Sierra Blackwood's disappearance became a cautionary tale about the dangers of sharing too much personal information on social media, particularly for young women who built their online presence around solo travel and outdoor activities. Her case sparked discussions about digital safety and the responsibility of social media platforms to protect users from stalkers and predators. Several hiking influencers changed their posting habits after Sierra's disappearance, reducing the real-time location information they shared and being more careful about revealing their exact whereabouts to strangers online. During the 7 months that Sierra remained missing, Blake Morrison had taken her to a remote area of the George Washington National Forest, nearly 100 miles from where she was last seen. Using his military training and extensive wilderness knowledge, Blake had established a hidden camp in a section of forest so remote that it was rarely visited by hunters or hikers. The location was accessible only by hiking several miles through dense forest with no marked trails, making it virtually impossible to find without knowing exactly where to look. Blake had spent years exploring this area and had carefully chosen it as the perfect place to keep someone prisoner without risk of discovery. The camp consisted of an underground shelter that Blake had constructed over multiple trips, disguised from aerial view and equipped with supplies that could sustain 2 people for months. Blake's plan had always been to keep Sierra alive as long as possible, feeding his obsession with complete control over another human being. The journal found at his home revealed that he had fantasized about this scenario for years, imagining that he could eventually convince Sierra to stay with him willingly. The reality of his mental illness made him incapable of understanding that what he was doing was torture, not romance. For 7 months, Sierra remained Blake's prisoner in this hidden forest camp, enduring conditions that no human being should ever experience. Blake's military training had taught him techniques for controlling prisoners that he now used to maintain power over Sierra. Subscribe if you believe predators like Blake deserve life in prison, because only criminals and psychopaths think this behavior is acceptable. The isolation and psychological manipulation gradually broke down Sierra's resistance, but she never stopped looking for opportunities to escape or signal for help. During her months in captivity, Sierra made multiple attempts to escape from Blake's hidden forest prison. The underground shelter where he kept her was secured with military-grade restraints and locks that Blake had acquired through his contacts in the veteran community. However, Sierra's determination to survive never wavered, even as Blake's mental state continued to deteriorate throughout the summer and fall of that year. Blake's journal entries from this period, later recovered by investigators, revealed his growing paranoia and violent tendencies as he struggled to maintain control over his captive. Sierra had managed to hide a small piece of broken metal from her destroyed hiking equipment, which she used over several weeks to gradually weaken one of the restraints that secured her to the shelter's wall. Her plan was to break free during one of Blake's hunting trips, when he would leave her alone for several hours at a time. Blake was confident that the remote location and Sierra's weakened physical condition made escape impossible, but he underestimated her intelligence and determination to survive. On a cold morning in late November, Sierra finally succeeded in breaking free from her restraints while Blake was away from the camp. Despite being malnourished and weakened by months of captivity, she managed to climb out of the underground shelter and began making her way through the dense forest toward what she hoped was civilization. Sierra had been observing Blake's movements for months and had noticed that he always returned to camp from the same direction, suggesting that there might be a trail or road in that area. Her escape attempt began successfully, and for several hours Sierra believed that she might actually make it to safety. She moved as quickly as her weakened body would allow, using the survival skills she had learned during her hiking career to navigate through the wilderness without leaving obvious tracks. Sierra knew that Blake would eventually discover her absence and come looking for her, so she focused on covering as much distance as possible before he realized she was gone. Unfortunately, Blake's military training and intimate knowledge of the forest gave him significant advantages in tracking her movement through the wilderness. When he returned to find Sierra missing, Blake immediately began pursuing her using tracking techniques he had learned during his army service. The dense forest that Sierra thought would hide her escape route actually worked in Blake's favor, as her passage through the underbrush left subtle signs that an experienced tracker could easily follow. Blake caught up with Sierra just as darkness was falling, finding her exhausted and barely able to continue walking. The recapture marked a turning point in Blake's treatment of his prisoner, as he became convinced that Sierra would never stop trying to escape unless he took more extreme measures to control her. His journal entries from this period show a complete break with reality, as he began to see Sierra's escape attempts as personal betrayals rather than natural human responses to imprisonment and torture. Blake's mental state had been deteriorating throughout Sierra's captivity, but her escape attempt triggered a psychotic episode that would ultimately lead to her death. In his twisted mind, Blake decided that if he couldn't keep Sierra as his willing companion, then he would ensure that no one else could ever have her either. The method he chose for her final punishment reflected both his military background and his complete loss of humanity. Blake had noticed a massive oak tree about half a mile from his hidden camp, with branches strong enough to support a human body at a height that would make the remains visible from a considerable distance. His plan was to use Sierra's death as a warning to other women who might reject his advances, while also satisfying his need for complete control over her fate. The actual details of Sierra's final hours are too disturbing to describe in detail, but investigators later determined that Blake had used military field craft techniques to construct the elaborate suspension system that would hold her body in the tree canopy. Blake's methodical approach to Sierra's murder demonstrated the calculating nature of his evil, as he spent considerable time ensuring that her remains would be discovered eventually, but not until he had sufficient time to disappear into the wilderness. Hit like if you think monsters like Blake should face the death penalty, because only evil people think he deserves mercy for what he did to innocent Sierra. After killing Sierra, Blake spent several days positioning her body in the oak tree using a complex system of ropes and pulleys that he had constructed from military surplus equipment. The positioning was deliberate and symbolic, designed to shock whoever eventually discovered the remains while also serving as a grotesque monument to Blake's power over his victim. Blake's journal revealed that he took photographs of his work before fleeing the area, suggesting that he planned to use the images to relive the experience or possibly to threaten other potential victims. Following Sierra's murder, Blake Morrison vanished completely into the vast wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. Despite extensive manhunts involving federal agents and military tracking specialists, no trace of Blake was found in the months following Sierra's death. His military training and extensive knowledge of wilderness survival made him capable of living off the grid indefinitely, and investigators suspected that he might have prepared multiple hidden camps throughout the region for exactly this type of disappearance. The discovery of Sierra's remains came 7 months after her initial disappearance, when 2 local hunters stumbled across the grisly scene while tracking a wounded deer through the remote forest area. The hunters immediately contacted authorities, but the remote location meant that it took several hours for investigators to reach the scene and begin processing the evidence. The discovery scene was unlike anything the veteran investigators had encountered in their careers. Sierra's body was suspended approximately 20 feet above the ground, wrapped in a makeshift net constructed from paracord, torn fabric from her own clothing, and natural vines that Blake had woven together during his months of planning. The positioning was clearly intentional, designed to maximize the psychological impact on whoever found her remains. Crime scene technicians spent 2 full days carefully documenting the scene and recovering Sierra's body, while FBI behavioral analysts studied Blake's methodology to better understand his mental state and predict his likely movements after the murder. The most shocking discovery came when investigators examined Sierra's personal effects, which Blake had left with her body as part of his twisted display. Her cell phone was still clutched in her skeletal hand, somehow protected from the elements by the way Blake had positioned her remains. When technicians managed to access the device, they found video footage that had been recorded just days before the hunters made their discovery, proving that Sierra had been alive far longer than anyone had hoped. The final video files showed Sierra in an obviously weakened state, speaking directly to the camera in what appeared to be a final message to her family and followers. Her words were barely audible, but digital enhancement revealed her describing Blake's identity and the location of his hidden camp. Most importantly, Sierra had managed to activate her phone's GPS function during her final days, creating a digital trail that would lead investigators directly to Blake's forest hideout. The location data from Sierra's phone guided a massive law enforcement operation to Blake's hidden camp, where investigators found evidence of his months-long imprisonment of Sierra along with disturbing indicators that he had been planning to abduct additional victims. The underground shelter contained restraints sized for multiple people, supplies that could support several captives, and detailed surveillance photos of other young women who frequently hiked in the region. Blake's journal entries from his final weeks revealed his intention to create what he called a collection of hiking influencers who would be forced to create content exclusively for him. The discovery of Blake's camp triggered the largest manhunt in Virginia state history, involving federal agents, state police, National Guard units, and specialized military tracking teams. Despite the massive effort, Blake Morrison remained elusive, using his extensive wilderness training to stay ahead of his pursuers. Investigators found evidence that he had prepared multiple escape routes and supply caches throughout the Appalachian Mountains, suggesting that he had always planned for the possibility of discovery and pursuit. For weeks, the manhunt dominated national news coverage as law enforcement agencies coordinated their efforts across multiple states. Blake's military service record revealed that he had received specialized training in escape and evasion techniques, making him particularly dangerous and difficult to capture. Several false sightings and dead-end leads frustrated investigators, while Blake's ability to live off the land meant that he could potentially remain hidden indefinitely. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source when Blake made a critical error that revealed his location to authorities. His obsession with social media and need for validation led him to access the internet from a public library in a small town near the West Virginia border. Blake had been monitoring the news coverage of Sierra's discovery and the manhunt for him, and he couldn't resist creating fake social media accounts to defend his actions and threaten other potential victims. FBI cybercrime specialists were monitoring all internet activity in the region for any signs of Blake's digital presence. When he logged into the library computer system, they immediately traced his location and deployed tactical teams to apprehend him. Blake was arrested without incident at a homeless shelter where he had been staying under a false identity, apparently believing that he could hide among the transient population while the manhunt continued in the wilderness areas. The arrest of Blake Morrison brought some measure of closure to Sierra's family and the hiking community that had been terrorized by her disappearance and murder. During his interrogation, Blake showed no remorse for his actions and actually seemed proud of the attention his crimes had generated. His complete lack of empathy and continued threats against other women convinced investigators that he would have continued killing if he had remained free. Blake's psychological evaluation revealed severe mental illness that had been exacerbated by his military service and social isolation, but experts agreed that his crimes were the result of calculated evil rather than diminished capacity. Blake Morrison was ultimately convicted of kidnapping, aggravated murder, and multiple federal charges related to his cyberstalking of Sierra and other victims. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people. The judge's sentencing statement specifically noted the premeditated nature of Blake's crimes and his complete lack of remorse as factors that eliminated any possibility of rehabilitation or redemption. Sierra Blackwood's tragic death sparked significant changes in how social media platforms handle stalking and harassment, particularly targeting young women who share location information online. New safety protocols were implemented for popular hiking destinations, and educational programs were created to help outdoor enthusiasts protect themselves from online predators. Sierra's family established a foundation in her memory that provides safety training and equipment to young hikers, ensuring that her death would contribute to protecting others from similar fates. Comment: never forget Sierra. If you believe predators like Blake Morrison represent pure evil that deserves no sympathy, because only monsters would defend his actions or suggest he deserves anything less than life behind bars. The Appalachian Trail community honors Sierra's memory every year with organized hikes that raise awareness about personal safety and the importance of looking out for fellow hikers. Her story serves as a permanent reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most beautiful and peaceful places, and that we must remain vigilant in protecting the innocent from those who would do them harm.